Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I want to supplement the last video I did. I realized that I covered about half the stuff that I wanted to cover. So in this video, I'm going to increase the depth of the last video I did, which was to review going over personal development from a spirituality perspective, as opposed to like a human self-help perspective. So what I'm trying to build is I'm trying to build a contrasting and also integrous model of personal development from both the human standpoint and the divine standpoint. Kind of following Spinoza, but elaborating on what Spinoza did. And so we organized the categories in this way in my last video. Number 1 was spirituality. Number 2, happiness. Number 3, creativity. Number 4, knowledge. Number 5, action and energy. Number 6, health, finances, relationships. And number 7, accountability. Some of these I covered better than others, but I've made some asterisks in my notes about what I want. Now we have a background. What was missing from my last video? Well, let's start with number 1, spirituality, where I broke it down into truth, love, peace, insight, and power. But I didn't break those out. So I can do that now. So number 1, spirituality. So what is truth in spirituality? Is truth in spirituality the same as truth in Western philosophy? No, truth in spirituality is about the truth of existence, the truth of being, the truth of knowing being. How about love? What does love mean from a spiritual perspective? Well, love has to do with relation. Otherwise, there is no love, right? Even self-love is a relation between you and you. So love is the feminine. Love is about relation, even the relation between the masculine and the feminine. If you look at the heart chakra in the 7 chakras model, it lies perfectly between the human masculine, which is the root chakra, and the divine feminine, which is the crown chakra. But divine love, what is divine love? Well, I think Spinoza talks about this. Divine love is acceptance of relation, acceptance of something in the mirror, something else, the other. Allowing the other to be and having a relationship between the thing and the other, right? Not to be too metaphysical here, right? But yeah, metaphysics is really important in spirituality, actually. It's just not called philosophy, but name me one spiritual person who's not doing metaphysics, right? So love is about relation. It's about the and relation could mean any kind of attachment. So, for example, your attachment to anything can function as a relation. So, your relation to, think of all the bad things that you would relate with. Think of all the good things that you could relate with, right? Think of the things that you do relate with. But from a spiritual perspective, divine love means the relation between you and yourself, and also your relation between you and the other, and the relationship between the other and you, and the relationship between you and transcendence, or not even. All of those relations. including every other finite form that could be here other than yourself on some level, which is partially finite, to the extent that you're expressing in finite. And another pointer I can give you guys, don't think of infinite as a mathematical notion. Think of infinite more as not finite. This is a good pointer, I think, infinite means not finite. So when we talk about, sometimes we're using infinity to mean like an extremely nuanced plurality, right? Like we can have infinitely many real numbers, or infinitely many complex numbers, or infinitely many rational numbers, and there's different sizes to infinity. That's like a mathematical notion of infinity, but we also have infinity just meaning, we almost want to say, instead of infinite, like a finite, right? Like advaita meaning not to, advaita. So dvaita means two. A is the alpha privative, so it's like a negation. So infinite really actually probably should be reframed more as something like afinite, right? Not finite. So that's, but then sometimes we do want to use the mathematical analogy too. So it just depends on context. So truth, we have truth, love, peace, insight, and power for spirituality. We're still focused on number one. Truth means, what is being? What is knowledge of being? What is knowledge of consciousness? What is consciousness? And even more deeper, like, what am I? What is the other? What is the error in that discernment, if any? So it's philosophy, but it's philosophy that's really like specialized as being centered on issue of existence or the self. And you can see this in existentialism in Western philosophy too. It's not like Indian philosophy has a monopoly on issues of the self. You can look at Zen Buddhism too, which comes out of Chan Buddhism in China, that gets at issues of the self too. So the self is really treated in world philosophy, but I think to give the Indians credit, Indians, not Native Americans, but Indians from India, they really like latched onto this issue the whole way through as to what is the nature of the self, and seeing that as being very fundamental. And that's basically what spirituality covers, because we take that for granted. It's something that we take for granted. And when we do value the issue of the self, it turns around a lot of values that we previously had, and it leaves us in a state of like not knowing what to do, right? This is like the person who experiences a dark night of the soul, right? Early on the path where they lose their mind, right? They go cray-cray for a little while, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, who's to say, right? I'm not saying that craziness is necessarily associated with insanity. Craziness is also associated with sanity too. Some of the people who posture as being the most sane are actually highly crazy too. So this paradox between like sanity and insanity, it hinges on epistemology, metaphysics, like who is right, who is wrong. And reality also tends to give you every possibility, right? We see that. We talked about that in my last video. Or actually, we talked about that in my video on how reality, I think it was like 3 videos back, where I talked about how absolute infinity gives you every reaction, how absolute infinity reacts and schools the finite. That video. It does it just to do it, right? Does it just to do it. Everybody gets their like karma, right, in the finite. Like no finite wins forever. There's always going to be some system out there that's going to provide the alternative point of view, right? It's like you're thinking that you won this game, but you realize life is not a game, right? You view life as a game on some kind of like superficial level, and you kind of go down a certain path, and you realize, oops, like something turned the game over. It turned it on its ear. Like it gave you a little bit for a while, or maybe it like took a little bit from you for a while. Then it's going to give you the opposite, right? Everybody has their 15 minutes of fame, right? And nothing is made permanent in the finite. No country has lasted forever. No perspective has lasted forever. No power has lasted forever in the finite. And even attaching to like morality, that's like seen through and given the other direction. Like in other words, like somebody who's like posturing as a teacher, they're going to get called out as being an egomaniac, who is totally in their shadow. They don't even realize that, but somebody else will point that out. Okay, so this is why the finite is a delicate thing. So when you talk about human self-help, you got to be a little bit careful here when it comes to like moral judgment, when it comes to what needs to be corrected, what doesn't need to be corrected, and what it means for you to actually like pursue a plan for goals, and whether or not there's actually free will or not there, and then how do you enjoy the whole thing, warts and all? When you look back on samsara and you recognize it as being necessarily that way, and having a partial necessary attachment to it, you also realize that you're not invested in that entirely, right? There's a part of you that's outside of that. There's a part of you that's like watching it like there's no controlling there, which is the spiritual side. Because in the human side, we want to think that everything is within our control, don't we? We want to be like the good police officer, right? But you know what? Police officers are human beings just like everybody else. I was riding the bus the other day, and I saw a police officer like walking down the street, Chestnut Street here, smoking a cigarette, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy reminds me of me when I was like 15 years old, trying to hide a smoke from, my boss or something like that. Like, people tend to think that police officers are moral. Right? Police officers are human beings. You can take somebody who's like a homeless drug addict and have a conversation with this guy and realize that this guy has a talent that is exceptional. I'll never forget this. I was in Golden Gate Park one time, and I had this conversation with this homeless guy. They called him the philosopher. And, I'd talked to a lot of people. I was young, like 20 years younger than I am now. So I was like, maybe 30. I'm not 50 yet, but okay, getting close to it. And a couple of people walked off and they said, okay, well, you're going to talk to the philosopher for a little while. And this guy had a shopping cart, and I was in the Half Dome, or the Half Shell in Golden Gate Park, like, practicing my music. And this guy was here, and the first thought in my mind was, shit, I got to talk to this fucking guy. You know what I mean? Like, they left me with him, and he's going to just, like, tax me. Like, I'm just going to be like, I want to get out of here. This was, like, the most intelligent guy that I've ever spoke to, probably, right? I mean, this guy was brilliant. Brilliant. A homeless guy living in the park, pushing a shopping cart. I shit you not, this guy was more like woke than professors at UCLA that I had experienced, or spiritual teachers online. This guy, he was just like, he obviously had some mental problems, but he was brilliant. He is extremely wise. And it was a pleasure to talk to him. And when his friends came back and took him away, like, I was sad to see him go. I was like, that guy was really smart. Really smart. So the thing is, the finite will teach you in ways that are very unexpected. It's going to try to like ruffle your edges. Okay? It's going to it's going to destabilize your picture as to what's true and false and good and bad within the finite perspective. It's going to make you question yourself. It's going to make you push yourself too. You're like an explorer. You're going to overshoot, you're going to undershoot. But also, it's like Spinoza realizing that even inadequate ideas are still ideas in God, or ideas in nature. In other words, the partial, the stupid, the bad, the evil, it's all part of what's here too, and it's all part of you as a finite perspective too. You're so busy, right, lecturing other people, see, because you want to be the teacher. You want to be the white knight, right? But you will not be able to get away with doing that forever, because reality is going to give you a wake-up call there and give you all the alternative moves and just chip away at you. You're going to live a life of feeling like you're under attack, and you're going to slowly get, like, it's going to wear you down, and you're going to become somebody who hates the human, and you're going to swing really hard into the divine. But then there's another lesson to be learned there. There are people that are swing so far into the divine that they're full of shit, right? They're theatrical people. They're people that are they're not being honest. Like the fake gurus. These people aren't perfect. They're posturing. They're like actors. And they're always teaching. You notice that? They're hiding. They're trying to make their finite perspective infinite. They don't realize that, like, the finite is not a perspective. It's infinite, or a finite, or not finite. Peace. So spirituality, we talked about truth, love. Now let's talk about peace. Peace means peace from the finite, or peace despite the finite. Like watching yourself die of cancer and being at peace with that, even though you're not happy about it. So notice that, like, there's a difference between, like, peace and happiness. Happiness is like there's spirituality and then happiness. So there's a difference between peace and happiness. A lot of people get this confused and they become kind of emotional idealists where they think that it's a kind of love is a feeling. Well, yeah, there's a feeling associated with love, but love isn't entirely a feeling. There's a thought that corresponds with love, namely an understanding of spirituality, right? Love with a capital L. Like, love as a feeling is more of a human thing. So in spirituality, that's more like happiness. I mean, if we're talking about feelings, then that goes beyond peace, because peace is, it has nothing to do with space and time. Like, peace with a capital P is Turiya. It's peace despite happiness almost. So there's a difference between like peace with a capital P and happiness. I think a lot of people cross this and kind of screw this up with regard to spirituality, which is a kind of a trap, in my opinion. The next issue is insight. Boy, Carl Jung really figured out how important of a word insight is. Intuition. Insight and intuition kind of mean kind of the same thing, right? There's a difference between an insight and some memorized theory. An insight is a recognition, like the insights that I have that I'm sharing with you in these videos, for example. Yes, it's related to theories, but if it's not if it's not a real insight, I don't want to share it. Like, I only really want to share insights, and insights, they're not coming from me. It's like I'm a creator where the insights are flowing through me and I'm just giving them form. And then power with a capital P, this is not like stage orange power or stage red power. This is the power of consciousness, the power of the divine, the power that creates karma, the power that creates an ability to detach from karma, the power that creates the ability to snuff out the I thought, or to conceive of oneself in a more nuanced way, from a more spiritual perspective. That power, that's power with a capital P. Now, let's focus on action and energy. Now, the problem with spirituality is that we want to think that along the lines that there really is no free will. That this is the inverse of the human masculine idea that I'm an agent for action and I have free will and I can do anything I would want to do, right? The Tony Robbins approach to spirituality. Well, what we see with action and energy in spirituality is this issue of it doesn't take you doing anything for action to occur. In other words, this will freak you out, okay? Action occurs no matter what. All you can really do is kind of like change your reaction to it, change your consciousness of it. But actually, action happens no matter what. Like, you could literally say, I'm not going to take any action anymore. And action still happens. action doesn't require a you to occur. It doesn't even require an identification with a you to occur. So this idea that there's a finite you that's taking action to improve things, be careful of that one, right? But also don't throw that out. You can kind of like hold both of those together in a kind of union, right? Like yoga. So yoga is this issue of union. I've really never really been a huge yoga person, but now I'm starting to realize I kind of like this idea, the distinction between like Prakriti and Purusha, right? Like you have this kind of dualism, actually, in yoga, which is kind of similar to Spinoza in a way, even though he wasn't a quantitative dualist. He was a qualitative dualist and a quantitative monist. But there's a space in Spinoza for like human self-help and then for spiritual enlightenment, which I like it. I like that in yoga, actually. I got to learn more about yoga. Okay, so the last thing I want to mention. Okay, health, finances, and relationships. This is something I didn't cover in my last video, which is number 6 on the list. So it was number 1, from the spirituality side of the coin, it was number 1 is spirituality, number 2, happiness, which is not the same as peace. Number 3, creativity, which is karma, how the dream moves, how the dream narrates. Okay. Number 4, knowledge, which is terminology, philosophy, pointers. 5, action and energy. Well, if there's no free will, all you can really do is change your mindset about the finite and allow reality to be reality and to accept reality for what it is. Think of Carl Jung here, right? Action and energy. Almost every spiritual system is about acceptance, right? As kind of an inverted anecdote to control. And then we have health, finances, and relationships. Now, the thing with these, though, is that this has to be worked on, but it also has to be accepted, because there's no you that can control any of this. All you can do is change your mindset toward it. So, for example, you become much more accepting of, stuff about yourself that's in your shadow, stuff about others that's in your shadow. Like but then at the same time, you still have the intention to do better. You can always change your mindset about something, even if you can't change reality about it, right? And then finally, the last thing I want to say is that even though I gave you guys these 2 framings of my 10 nodes of life coaching model, when I present my 10 nodes of life coaching model, I don't order them. I scramble them deliberately every time. Because what I'm trying to say is, by scrambling the list, I don't want this theory to become like a trap. Right? I want it to be a model for you to be able to use this theory in a way that helps you, or even better yet, for you to develop your own theory for you to create your own theory. That would be what I would want the most out of my influence on you. Okay, friends? Hopefully this was a good video. Merry Christmas. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.